food objects. Let's look deep into history for a minute. Not talking about China, although arguably some of the oldest evidence for alcoholic beverage generation has been in China. If you're interested in China, I'm going to point you to a name. Here, I'm going to write it up here. McGovern. Patrick McGovern at Penn. He is the luminary in this field. And actually, some of the work that I'm referring to in this slide is also his work. So there's an extra reading for you. But let's focus on ancient Sumeria. Again, we're talking about the earliest evidence of beer, and that's ranging from 4000 BCE. Now, let me remind you briefly that we talked about Egypt and evidence for wine in a previous lecture, and that predated this number by quite a bit. We won't go back there, but let's see. So the previous slide, I think, shows you that not only is beer common, it's also ancient to human cultures. Again, we're talking about beer-type beverages where we have to mobilize that unavailable sugar, that unavailable starch, into something that the bugs can ferment. What we're looking at here is extracted from a figure published in Analytical Chemistry, quite a long time ago now. This is a potsherd from a Sumerian archaeological site, Godin Tepe. Godin Tepe, an important archaeological site ranging from this period in Sumerian history. And there's two things that to point out here. So here's the potsherd. What is a potsherd? It's a fragment of pottery. A potsherd from this site, Godin Tepe. And here we have the cuneiform words for beer. And what do they appear to be? They appear to be vessels, right? They appear to be some kind of amphora with a handle, right? Here's a handle, and here's the vessel, and here's the spout. And they take different shapes, but you can imagine that these are useful if you're just going to jam the thing down into some sand, right? Oh, here's some sand that'll hold it upright. Yeah. The other interesting thing to note here is that in this vessel, on these cuneiform words, we see scratches that appear. We see scratches. Apparently these are hash marks or scoring that are on the surface of the vessel. This is only interesting because we see those similar scratch marks when we look at this potsherd. And this, to these authors, looked like a clue. Let's come back to the clue in just a second. The other thing that we can say from alternative lines of evidence is that there's barley present at lots of Mesopotamian sites from this period. So I've mentioned that this is 6 row. 6 row. Right? We've talked about that number of spikelets on the grain in previous discussions when we were talking about flours. Let's just remind ourselves that 6 row is going to be high in protein. Not something that we would probably use today to brew with. Why not? Our brewing grains are going to need to be high in starch relative to protein. So 6 row is not something that we would use to brew with. But if it's what they had available there in abundance, they're going to turn it into something useful. Now, come back now to these potsherds. So we have evidence that they had the stuff to make beer. But were they making beer? Well, these potsherds contained lots of residue in these grooves or scoring, right? And what they seemed to contain was something known as beer stone. Now, you'll see beer stone in some beverages, especially homebrew, as sediment. I'm trying to spell sediment. Right? The dust that settles out at the bottom of your beer bottle. That's calcium oxalate. Here's the structure of calcium oxalate. Those of you that are paying attention realize that when I keep saying that 8, I'm talking about an acid. This is the conjugate base form of the acid. There's one acid group. I'm reminding you of your organic chemistry. This is a carboxylic acid. My writing is looking pretty funny here, sorry. Okay, carboxylic acids. In any case, it forms an insoluble compound with calcium ion. So we see when they do a chemical analysis of these potsherds, what they find is beer stone. Strong evidence of the presence, especially considering what other stuff is found at these archaeological sites. Strong evidence for the production of beer. At least 4000 BCE, right? Now, 4000 BCE, we're talking about what? 6,000 years ago. So, now, to be fair, and I always like to be skeptical, to be fair, calcium oxalate is a component of beer sediment, but there's also plenty of other vegetable sources that we can derive it from, aside from 6-row barley. I just noticed. I barely spelled barley. Those are some other common places to find oxalic acid. That's going to be spinach and rhubarb. However, especially when we remember that this is the cuneiform word for beer. All of this is sort of as good as it gets in terms of archaeological evidence for the ancient production of beer. So, previous slide, I showed you that it's common. Here I'm showing you that it's also ancient to human society. All of that telling us what? Beer is incredibly important to human culture. Okay, also, staying with the idea of Sumer for just another moment, this is a hymn to Ninkasi, and I'm going to read part of it to you. So you can I hope that you will forgive me for this. For now, this is a Sumerian hymn dating to potsherd from evidence that's significantly later than that 4000 BCE that I was just showing you, but in any case from this of similar period and location in human history. There's Ninkasi. She's the goddess of brewing, and this is a hymn written to her. And I've highlighted here some interesting terms that are going to come up as we proceed with our discussion of beer. You are the one who bakes the bopper in the big oven. Puts in order the piles of hulled grains. Oops, my mistake. Let me go back. Puts in order the piles of hulled grains. Ninkasi, you are the one who bakes the bopper in the big oven, puts in order the piles of hulled grains. You are the one who waters the malt. Malt is germinated grains. You are the one who waters the malt set on the ground. The noble dogs keep away even the potentates. Everybody wants to get at the grain. We have guard dogs to keep people away. Ninkasi, you are the one who waters the malt set on the ground, and the noble dogs keep away even the potentates. Let's skip ahead. You are the one who spreads the cooked mash on large reed mats. Coolness overcomes. Ninkasi, you are the one who spreads the cooked mash on large reed mats, and coolness overcomes. I'm giving you this picture, which is stolen from the LA Times. This is an example from sake production. These are, I believe they're fermenting or they're malting rice grains in this picture, and malting involves soaking the grains with water and then heating them up and letting them germinate. So I just thought this picture was evocative of watering the malt and spreading it out on large reed mats. I thought that was a fun picture. So let's get back to Ninkasi though. You are the one who holds with both hands the great sweet wort. Okay, the great sweet wort. What is wort? We'll come back to it in a moment, but I wanted to give you some hints here about what happens in brewing. We have to germinate the grain. We'll come back to why. It's important to germinate the grain. Again, it has to do with activating that unavailable starch. Here's the wort. We've extracted the sugars. The wort is the liquid that's full of extracted sugars. It's sweet because it's full of sugars. Ninkasi, you are the one who holds with both hands the great sweet wort, brewing it with honey and wine. Blah, 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 blah. The filtering vat, which makes a pleasant sound, you place appropriately on top of a large collector vat. I'm going to introduce a term here, filtering vat. It's something that we do in brewing, is to lauter. Lauter. That means we basically filter out the grains from which we've extracted all that starch and sugar. It makes a pleasant sound. So sometimes I find myself when my wife and I pop up a bottle of champagne, I tell her, I love that sound of that popping cork. And why? Because it means I'm about to have a wonderful glass of champagne. Finally, when you pour out the filtered beer of the collector vat, it is like the onrush of the Tigris and Euphrates. I love that image, right? We're pouring out the beer. It's very poetic, which is appropriate for a hymn to the goddess of beer. It is like the onrush of the Tigris and Euphrates. So, but the cool thing about this poem is that it tells us a lot about how the Sumerians made beer 4,000, 5,000, 6,000 years ago. And we see that that involved several of the same steps that are still in use today. We'll pause there and move on and we'll pick it up again in the next lecture.